I'm so glad to be here in this space with you, and thank you so much for joining me. I want to talk to you a little bit about love and Bierocks. And Bierocks might be a word you've never heard of before. It's spelled B-I-E-R-O-C-K-S, so it's not like beer if you're a beer drinker. Sorry, there's not even any beer in what I'm going to talk about today. But Bierocks is a Swiss Mennonite recipe that I got 25 years ago when I lived in central Kansas. But first I want to talk to you about love. So 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply, for it covers a multitude of sins. Now, I've never heard anybody preach on that, and I don't know why, because I could totally make a sermon out of that. But basically, if you love somebody deeply, above all, it will cover a multitude of sins. And I'll tell you, I've probably done a multitude of sins in my life that I was sorry for, and now I'm finding out as I read this verse, if I love somebody deeply, it will cover that. Now, of course, Jesus is our Redeemer, but he teaches us to love. And Peter wrote that. It was in 1 Peter. It's one of his letters to the Christians. And I think back that Peter would know about Jesus and his love. He walked with him for 3.5 years. You know, all of us wish that we could have just 5 minutes with Jesus when he was here on earth, but Peter got 3.5 years with him. And so he totally knew love, and he totally knew Christ. And even though Peter was completely devoted to Jesus and completely followed him and did everything and believed in him, even he himself had some indiscretions and denied Christ 3 times. And Jesus even told him that he would deny him. And Peter's like, no, Master, I will never do that. I love you. I will follow you forever. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. But we all know the rest of that story, as Paul Harvey used to say. The night that Jesus was taken into custody, Peter did deny Jesus 3 times, probably because he was scared, probably because he thought he might get taken into custody too, who knows. But Jesus had told him, when you hear a rooster crow, that's when you will have denied me 3 times. And as soon as Peter denied him 3 times, and I think it may have taken him 30 minutes or an hour to do, he did hear that rooster crow, and he realized what he was done. He was incredibly remorseful, and I'm sure if any of us were in that situation, we just would have felt devastated. Of course, Jesus died, and I'm sure Peter was very sad. But we know that Jesus rose from the dead and that he walked the earth for a while afterwards. And when Peter and Jesus met up for the first time before Jesus ascended into heaven, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, see the theme here? Do you love me, Peter? And Peter said, yes, Master, I do. And then Jesus said, then feed my sheep. And Jesus asked him, like I said, 3 times, and 3 times Peter said yes, and 3 times Jesus said, if you love me, then feed my sheep. And so, wow, you can love somebody by feeding them. And as we go back to 1 Peter 4:8, it says, above all, love each other deeply, for it covers a multitude of sins. That's why I'm so passionate about this. That's why you can cook. Something that I love to do. I can feed people. I love to see the looks on their faces. And Jesus said, feed my sheep and feed my lambs. And Peter said, that can cover a multitude of sins. That's why I'm here today. And that's why I feel like cooking is a way to love each other in Christian love. So let's get started on how to make Bierocks. First, the reason why I know about Bierocks is because I lived in Wichita, Kansas for 7 years, most of the 90s. And I used to sell insurance at nighttime as a side job. I would moonlight. And about an hour north of Wichita, Kansas, there were a lot of Swiss Mennonite towns, just really good, strong American people in central Kansas. And they all came from Swiss Mennonites back in the 1800s. A group of Swiss Mennonites from Germany and Switzerland settled in Kansas. And so there were a lot of communities in mid-Kansas that were Swiss and made a lot of Swiss food. Well, I was in some homes and selling life insurance to these families over a period of some weeks. And, you know, like when you have an insurance agent that's talking to you and selling you something in your home, you really don't want to feed them, and you just really want to get business done and then get them out of their house, right? These ladies and these families, the wives of the husbands, were so kind and nice to me. And instead of swishing me out, they gave me a Bierock to eat, and it was delicious. And not only that, I got to know them more, and they gave me the recipe and told me how to make Bierocks. Those ladies completely loved me. I felt so loved when I lived so many miles away from home, because I'm here from Northwest Arkansas, and I want to show you this recipe and give the love to you as well, and just show you the love that hopefully that you feel in this recipe that I felt from those sweet Swiss Mennonite ladies in central Kansas. So we are going to make the bread dough first, and you can make any bread dough you want for this, but it's not truly authentic, I don't think, unless you make this bread dough, because it has egg in it, which not all bread doughs do. It's got a decent amount of sugar, even though this is a savory dish. And so I've just already got it all measured out here for you, but the first thing you do is you take 2 cups of hot water. You don't want to boil the water because it will kill the yeast. But here's 2 cups, and what you do is you take 2 packets of active dry yeast, and you empty that into the warm-ish hot water. It would probably be the temperature of the type of water you like if you wanted a nice, good soaker bath. So 2 packets of active dry yeast. I always laugh because every single packet of yeast I've ever seen says active dry. Like, I've never seen a packet that said inactive, not dry yeast. Anyway, that's just my funny sense of humor, so I always wonder stuff like that. I always make sure that every bit of that yeast is out of there, because truth be told, in one of these packets, it's 2 teaspoons and 1/4 of a teaspoon of yeast. You don't have to use 2 packets, though. You can actually use a jar of active dry yeast. Again, I kind of laugh about that because it's always active dry yeast. But if you do that, then just measure 2 teaspoons and 1/4 of a teaspoon per packet. So since we're doing 2 packets of this, it would be 4 teaspoons and 1/2 of active dry yeast out of the jar. Now, if you don't remember that, it also says back here. So you can cheat and just read what 2 packets are. You let this sit for 10 minutes. The recipe says is that you let it sit till it gets kind of milky, which is a weird way of putting it, but I don't know if you can see that the yeast is kind of starting to fall. And it does actually look kind of milky from the end. So I'm going to let that sit here. I'm going to throw my yeast packets away because I'm constantly throwing things away. You can ask my husband. Sometimes I throw things away I shouldn't. And I'm going to get together the rest of it. So the rest of it calls for 1 egg. So I'm going to break that egg into my mixer. And guess what? I got a shell in there like I always do. So I got that shell out. Going to start my mixer and just let it go a little bit. While that's going a little bit, you need to have a quarter of a cup of butter, which is a 1/2 stick of butter, melted. I put it in the microwave. I'm sure the Mennonite women did not put their butter in the microwave. I do. Let that melt just a little bit to get it softer. So then I add that to the egg mixture. Or it's just the egg at this point. You add a 1/2 cup of sugar as well. There's a little bit of butter still left in there, so I'm going to get it out. A teaspoon of salt. Pour that in. Let that continue to stir with your mixer. Again, I'm really waiting for the yeast to get milky and to get activated in the hot water. Let's test it here. Yes, I can be an impatient cook, and I'm sure a lot of us are. I will say that lots of times I've heard people say making bread is hard or it's difficult. A lot of people get bread makers. That's okay. There's no shame in a bread maker. I've never felt the need to get a bread maker, though, because I really don't feel like it's something that's that hard to do on your own, because you're still already putting all the ingredients in. So, by the way, whenever you use yeast, I always use either a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon. I don't want to put metal in there. Sometimes metal interacts with the yeast and maybe makes it inactive a little bit. So that's just a little tip I've learned through the years, and I've actually read it too, is don't use metal when you're using yeast. Even this right here is a plastic paddle. Now this is a metal bowl, but once it starts interacting with all of the other ingredients, it's okay. It's just in this early stage of getting that yeast activated. Okay, I think this is pretty milky. Do you see how it looks milky? And it just kind of looks like something you would not want to drink, but that is yeast that's been activated, 2 cups. So now you add that to the rest of this mixture. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Let that stir. Be a little bit careful. Sometimes I kind of go back and forth a little bit because this mixer, I don't know if you guys' mixers are like this, but this one splashes at me a lot. I've said several mean words to it before when it splashed me. So then you add half the amount of flour. So I pre-measured the flour. There's actually 7 cups of flour in here. And I want to talk a little bit about the flour. You can use any kind of flour you want. So if you need gluten-free, if you have different things, different needs for your dietary reasons, your allergies or whatever, that's okay to use whatever flour you want. So this I have used purebred flour. I like Pillsbury's Best bread flour. Pillsbury's not paying me for this. It's just that I've learned that they literally have the best flour for bread making. Sometimes instead of 7 cups of bread flour, I'll do 5 cups of bread flour and 2 cups of whole wheat flour. It makes it more hearty. Lots of times people like the whole wheat flavor. I've never done 100% whole wheat flour. It's just too grainy, and the kids will not eat it that way. But you can do whatever you want, any kind of flour. Once again, for this recipe, just for this exercise today, I've got 7 cups of bread flour. It says to put half the amount in there. So I'm not good at math, but even I know that 7 cups of flour, half is 3.5 cups. So I'm going to just add my flour. This is a 3/4 cup because that's what I grabbed when I opened the drawer. I'm just kind of estimating what about 3.5 cups looks like. Put the mixer down. Hopefully my mixer doesn't spit flour at me too badly. That's why I kind of do it slowly. And there it goes. And it just looks like beautiful dough rising, mixing together. So it kind of looks like a goopy mess right now, and that's the way it's supposed to look. And then you just add the rest of the flour. I kind of do it a spoon at a time until it's well mixed. Now the recipe calls for 7 cups of flour, and that's what the Mennonite ladies gave me, and that's what I've always used. I've never really used all 7 cups of flour in this recipe, except one time when I used it all, and it was the weirdest experience, and then I found out later there was absolutely no humidity in the air, so it probably has something to do with the humidity. So I'm going to keep on adding a little bit more flour until this pulls away from the bowl. And I don't know if you can hear the mixer, but it's starting to labor a little bit because the dough is getting thicker. And when the dough starts pulling away from the bowl and getting completely stuck in the paddle of the mixer, that's when you know it's starting to really come together. I have about half a cup of flour still left in my bowl. I'm not going to use it because I can see from the way the mixture looks that it is getting exactly how I want it to be. And I'll show you what that looks like. See how it looks like just a big mess on the paddle, and it's actually very heavy and very dense, and it's starting to fall through. That's exactly what you want. I take it off, kind of just go like that, and the weight of it is pulling it down into the bowl. So I'm going to get rid of this paddle. The next thing I do before I do anything else is I get a greased bowl, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I get my trusty can of Pam spray. You can use butter and a paper towel. Like, that's how my mom used to make bread, is that she'd always get butter in a paper towel and swish it around. You can do Crisco with your hands. You can do Crisco oil with your hands. However you want to get a greasy bowl, that's what you need to do. And the reason why you want to do that is because this dough is going to start raising. And if the bowl is not greased, the dough is actually going to stick to the bowl, and you're not going to have a good product later on. So anyway, I have about half a cup of flour left. What I do is I just dump that here on the counter. Make sure your counter is clean, by the way. If you're like me, my kitchen counter has all of family life on it, so sometimes it's not clean, but I made sure it was clean before I did that today. So you take the dough, you dump it out. You may have to have your hand help you. It is very sticky. You want it to be sticky, and the reason why is because when it's sticky, it's moist, and you don't want dry bread when you're doing this. So you just kind of get in there. You know, like 5- and 6-year-olds like to get their hands in the goop and the slime and all that. That's what this is like. So maybe that interest as kids really just helps us want to do something later as adults when we're making bread. Do you see how easy that came together? It's just absolutely a beautiful, beautiful ball of dough. You put it, just slap it in that greasy bowl. Then you take it and you turn it over. And the reason why you do that is because it got kind of greasy on the bottom when you did it. I turned it over, and I'm going to let that rest for 2 hours. You can also put it in the refrigerator with some cellophane over it overnight and do it the next morning. I never do that, but you can. You let that rest for 2 hours, and then the magic's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to start making the filling, and that is really the magic, because it's cabbage, onions, and ground meat. And most people's kids don't like cabbage, and a lot of kids don't like onions. But why I say it's magical is because the kids don't know that there's cabbage and onions in there unless you tell them. It just kind of is so small, and you cook it so well that it just kind of melts into the meat. So you take 1 medium onion. The recipe calls for 6 cups of shredded cabbage. I have got a beautiful half cabbage here that I'm going to do. When we shred it up, it gets to be about 6 cups, believe it or not. So first I'm going to start with the onion. I'm going to cut up this onion. Now, I'm no onion professional cutter person, and you're going to see that by how I do it. I know that the professional chefs do something with their knives, and 3 seconds later they have a beautiful chopped up onion. I don't do that. I actually would be afraid that I would cut my finger off. And I have many cut parts on my finger, but I'll just take an onion, I'll slice it as thinly as I can. So I didn't go to culinary school. I went to the University of Arkansas Music School, and they didn't teach you how to cut onions there. So, professionally anyway. So I just cut onion slices like this. I hope that Bobby Flay is not watching me cut this onion, because he would just roll his eyes. Now I have it stacked up like that, and I just make slices this way. Watch your fingers. Kind of roll your nails in when it gets closer, so if it cuts anything, they're going to cut your nails and not your tips of your fingers. And then I go the opposite direction, and I just go like that. Sometimes I cry because sometimes the onion is really strong. This onion is a Vidalia yellow onion. They're a little bit sweeter, and they're not as strong, and they're delicious in anything I use them. So then I just keep on running my knife through it like this until it's nice and small. Now I have an 11-year-old granddaughter who doesn't like onions. She doesn't like cabbage. And she doesn't like anything that she thinks is going to come out of the garden. And she likes these. So I take this diced up medium sliced onion. I put the heat on my frying pan. I put some oil in there. I use olive oil for a lot of cooking, but I don't use it to fry stuff. And the reason why is because olive oil has a higher burn rate than other oils. So I like to use vegetable oil for things like this because I do not want these onions to burn. Olive oil has a really good flavor, but it also has a higher burn point. Vegetable oil typically has no flavor, but you can cook things and fry things at a nice rate. Okay, while the onions are simmering in that oil and getting hot, I'm going to take my half a cabbage. These cabbage leaves on the very end kind of fell off, and that's okay. I don't really like to use them because sometimes they're a little bit dirty and they're just not the same crispness as a regular cabbage. So I've halved this cabbage. I cut the core out. You don't have to. My Mennonite ladies didn't cut the core out. It just is a little bit tougher and can cook just a little bit harder. So I just take my knife and I kind of make like a triangle cut and it pops this out. So I take my cabbage and then it's half a cabbage and then I half it again and then I half it again. So I've got 4 halves, which are really eighths. You know, 1/8 of the cabbage because it was a half to begin with. I take my food processor, put it here. I put the blade in. I don't use the slicer. I put the blade in, and I actually just take 2 of these cabbage portions. I put it in here, and I pulse it. And my cabbage starts getting really itty-bitty. Now, you do not have to use a food processor to chop up your cabbage. You could actually buy shredded up cabbage in the produce section, and that's what I used to do before I got my food processor. Or you can chop it up by yourself. I've just learned that when it gets a little itty-bitty like this, you fool the children and they don't even know that there's cabbage in there. So I've got half of this here. I'm going to get a bowl. And empty what I've got in here because if you keep on chopping cabbage, it actually will turn into juice, and cabbage juice is not in this recipe. So there's half the cabbage, and that really is about 3 cups right there. And remember, we need 6 cups. I put the other cabbage pieces in there. And I do the very same thing. Now I pulse it. You can just put the on and let it run, but you can't really control because there's always these little big pieces that are like some of your kids that don't want to do what they're told. They don't want to chop up like the more compliant cabbage pieces. So you let it know who's boss. I do have one cabbage piece. He does not want to get chopped up finely, but he doesn't know who's boss. So I'm going to get this cabbage. See how little itty bitty that is? Kids don't even know there's cabbage, like I said. Now you can kind of smell the cabbage in the air. Cabbage doesn't have the prettiest smell. I've never seen a Bath and Body Works scent called cabbage, but it is really healthy for you and it makes things very delicious. It's got a lot of fiber. It also has a lot of water in it, believe it or not. Okay. 6 cups of shredded cabbage. Let's go look at the onions. Okay. The onions are nice and cooked through. I'm going to kind of stir them around a little bit. The reason why you cook the onions before everybody else is because if not, they might still stay a little bit of crunchy in there. So the recipe calls for 2 pounds of ground meat. This is ground turkey. I make almost everything with ground turkey because I'm allergic to beef and pork, but you can put beef in there, you can put pork, you can put ground venison. That's why the recipe says ground meat, because you can put any kind of ground meat you want. For me, this is ground turkey. I give this recipe, Bierocks, with ground turkey, and people don't even know it's turkey. I think they think it's beef. I don't know. So you just take the 2 pounds of ground turkey or ground beef, ground venison, ground pork, whatever you want, and you fry it in the onions. Now, some people that are vegan or vegetarian, they could actually put that impossible meat in this, which you wouldn't even have to cook that. You can put crumbled up tofu, and I have done that before. And then you would just have to put a lot more spices in the tofu, because tofu really just is the flavor of whatever you put into it. So I'm going to put my lid on this meat and let it cook on low for probably about 5 or 10 minutes. And we'll just let the cabbage hang out for just a little bit. But see, it's mostly cooked. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to capitalize on the moisture that's in there. I'm going to get my cabbage. And I am just going to lay this uncooked, raw, very finely chopped cabbage right on top. Because as you know, the way a lot of people cook cabbage is they steam it, right? Well, we're going to use that same concept. I'm not stirring it in yet. And I'm just going to let that sit there and steam. I'm going to put it down low to about 3 on my scale of 10. And I'm just going to let that cabbage steam and let the meat keep on cooking. Once again, if you had ground beef, ground pork, ground venison, you would do the same thing. Now, tofu is not going to do that. And so what you would want to do with that is you're probably going to add a little moisture. Impossible meat that you get, which is a lot of vegetable products in there, you would just cook the cabbage with the onions and then add the impossible meat, because of course that is not meat that needs to be cooked. So let's let this cook down and see what happens in about 5 minutes. Let's check to see how the cabbage is sweating and everything's cooking together. Ooh, lots of steam coming up. And I'm just going to take this and start stirring it. And I just kind of start stirring the meat and the onions into the cabbage. I don't know if you can see this or not, but a lot of the moisture that was in there before has kind of cooked out as it steamed the cabbage. So you just kind of mix it all together, make sure it's equally mixed meat, cabbage, onions. You can't really even see the onions anymore at this point. And I'm going to say this is done. Here's a little piece of cabbage that didn't cook, and I probably didn't chop it enough. I'm just going to get rid of it, because we don't want somebody to get that in their Bierock and feel like they got cheated because they got something that they didn't want that everybody else didn't have to get. Okay, I'm going to drain this a little bit still, even more. So I'm going to take this frying pan. I'm going to do a cursory draining into this frying pan. What I mean by cursory is I don't want to get all of the liquid out, because you don't want to have dry innards in your Bierock. But I do want to get some of that extra juice, because you don't want it to be so juicy either that it makes the bread wet when it's baking. So here's this, and then we've got to add salt and pepper. So I'm just going to get another bowl. Dang it, I should have had this out. Get another bowl, put the meat mixture into this bowl, and then we just got to add salt and pepper to it. So this is a German-Swiss meal, and so Germans in the Swiss just had a lot of salt and pepper. They didn't really put garlic in a lot of stuff. They may have put fennel. I don't have fennel here, but you put about 2 teaspoons of pepper. I've just done it so much I kind of know what 2 teaspoons of pepper looks like. Now, some people like a lot of pepper. My husband peppers everything. You can add more pepper. It's not wrong to do. And about 2 teaspoons of salt. Since it's ground turkey and it doesn't taste as well as beef and pork do, you might want to put a little bit of extra salt just to give it some more flavor. And then you just stir. You stir the salt and pepper in there, and you have got the most delicious food here. So you could eat this. You could just eat this, maybe serve it with rice, or just eat it loose like that. That's fine. But this is the insides to what Bierocks are. Now, if you want to change it up, if you want to give it some Asian spice, if you want to give it some Italian spice, you want to make it your own, please do. Because Bierocks are bread with meat and cabbage inside. Just make sure whatever you do that you can be consistent with cabbage and onions and meat. Everything else can be added. Because I don't really think it would be a Bierock if it didn't have ground meat and cabbage and onions in it. Here's the insides. Okay, it's been about an hour or two. And I'm going to check on the bread dough that has been raising here on a warm spot. It is about double. What you do when it's like this is you punch it down. You punch it down. So there's like a well in there. You take it and you just dump it out onto something that you can flour or knead. Now this dough, something that I really like about this, is you really don't have to add flour. It just kind of stays together. And I kind of knead it a little bit. If you've got some real pokey rings or rings with like a lot of jewels or gems sticking out, you might want to take your ring off to do this because you might get some dough in there. But when you get your loaf the way you want and you've punched it down, then you want to cut it into 16 equal pieces. I always just kind of chuckle at myself because I never really get it into 16 complete equal pieces. But how I do it is I take a bread knife, I cut it in half, as well as I can. Then I cut it in half again. So now I got 4 pieces. Get where I'm going with this? I'm going to turn 4 pieces, one piece into 2 pieces into 4 pieces. Then I know I need 4 more pieces, so I cut each one of these into 4 more pieces, and that's how I get 16 pieces of dough. Cut them all up like that. It is kind of goopy, but that's how you do it. Okay, so I cut it into 16 pieces. I've got 8 here just for simplicity's sake, because the rolling surface can get really overwhelmed. So I take each ball of dough that I've cut into all those 16 pieces. Like I said, I only have 8 here now. I kind of knead it with my hand, get it into an equal ball. I take my rolling pin and I just roll it out. Until it's about the size of what I would say is like a small tortilla shell. Now it's not going to be completely round. It's not beautiful, but that's what it's going to look like. And I do this 8 times. I don't do it one at a time. I don't do one and then fill with the liquid, with the meat, and then do another and fill with the meat. I guess I'm more of a Henry Ford automation line where I try to do all things one time, step 1 a bunch of times and then step 2 and just do like an automation line. Now, if you have a kid, a spouse, a sister, and you want to have good talking time while you're making this, this is the time when you hand them the rolling pin and you get a rolling pin and you just talk. If you're mad about something, you just really take your aggression out, rolling out this dough. Oh, I'm so mad at those deer because they ate my flowers, or I'm so mad at my boss because they made me work overtime. Whatever your aggression is, you just really get it out as you're making these 8 pieces of dough into what I call not perfectly round, small tortilla size. It's funny because the Mennonite ladies didn't say all that, but you know, I don't even know if they had ever eaten tortillas now that I think about it. That was 25 years ago, and sweet ladies, but this was in the middle of Kansas, and I don't know if there was a lot of tortillas or even Mexican food in those parts. I don't remember it. And my last one, and I'm doing this fast because I've done it many times. Take your time. For those that have, you know, make pie crust or baking powder biscuits or anything where you roll stuff out, if you'll notice, I did not have to add any flour to keep this from sticking. It's just the recipe. It's just really good. It's very pliable and it's easy to do. So now comes the filling part. So my Mennonite ladies grease the pan. I don't do that. I've modernized it, I guess. I fell in love with parchment paper years ago because you don't have to grease pans. And it kind of ensures that the cooking surface is clean. Because, you know, sometimes our cookie sheets get stains on them and stuff from past cooking. So nothing sticks on this. I love it. And I am going to get a cookie scoop and get the meat in there so it's equal. So I have a normal cookie scoop. If you measure it out, it's about 1/8 of a cup. My recipe calls for 2 cups of, or 1/4 cup of meat mixture in each Bierock. So I'm just going to do 2 scoops. I'm going to do 1 scoop, and it's a healthy scoop. It's not like a leveled off scoop. 2 scoops of meat. It's going to be kind of falling all over the place. Before I close it up, I want to tell you that if you want to put cheese in here, which in Kansas they actually do sell some Bierocks with cheese, now's the time to put the cheese in. There's certain cheeses you do not want to put in there, and I just know from experience. Do not put cheddar cheese in this. Cheddar cheese is oily when it bakes, and it's just going to be a greasy, oily mess when you bite into the Bierock bread pocket. So you don't want to do that. Swiss cheese is probably very conducive to the type of food this is and the country that it came from. However, American cheese, just a slice of good old-fashioned American cheese, it melts really nice and it goes really well in here too. For me, I watch my cheese intake because it just doesn't set well with me, and I know a lot of people are the same way. So I leave it out. Actually, since this makes 16, lots of times I'll do 8 without cheese and 8 with cheese. Like I said, you can do whatever you want. So you just take this, cheese or not, and you pull up the top, let those 2 guys kiss each other, and then take the other 2 sections, you know, from the corners, so to speak, and you just kind of pinch it all together and smash it all together until there's no meat showing at all. And then you might want to kind of round it with your hands, and you've got this cute little dough ball that has 1/4 cup of meat in there. And you just put it there on your baking sheet. And then you just do that 8 more times. So when we make 16 of those, you're going to have 2 cookie sheets out. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm just doing 8 right now. Again, 2 heaping scoops of that, or 1/4 cup, however you want. Now, if you want to make big old ones, you can make big old ones. You can make them really big and put 1/2 cup of meat in there. Like I said, there's no wrong way to do it, except not do it. So once again, I'm making my little ball here. I put it on my cookie sheet, and I'm going to do 4 this way and 4 that way, and I'm going to have 8. So once you've got these 8 little cute Bierocks resting in the pan after you've made them, cover them with a towel, put them in a warm spot. Again, I know this is a warm spot on my counter, and let them raise a little bit more for about an hour. Make sure the towel that you put on it is clean. Make sure it's not the towel that everybody's been drying their hands on for the last couple days. I'm kind of OCD about that, but always take a clean towel out whenever you're putting it on food that is going to rest. Okay, let's test these to see how they've been sitting here raising for us. Oh my gosh, they look so cute. So we've got 8 little Bierocks. They're not baked yet, and we're going to put them in the oven. It's at 350. We've got it preheated. They bake for about 30 minutes. But about halfway through, I'll put it down at the bottom rack in about 15 minutes just to make sure it gets cooked evenly in my oven. Some people's ovens are really great, and you don't have to worry about that. This oven I've learned just to make sure that I change it around to make sure it bakes evenly. I will say one thing, don't put it in the oven when it's not preheated all the way yet and put it on the top rack, because if you do that, then the burners are still going and it'll kind of burn the top of the bread before it's evenly done. So you just want to make sure that the oven is preheated all the way so that the coils aren't going full on and burn the bread before it's ready to be cooked all the way through. Okay, so I took the 15 minutes mark and I put the Bierocks on the second rack in the oven. And I just want to say that this is a recipe that you can do however you want. Just like I talked about how you can change the bread dough, the flour that you use, to gluten-free, to add some more whole wheat, anything you want to do to that, even rice flour I've seen done. But you can add things and make it your own. So the Mennonite ladies never did this little trick that I do, but this is all because of Chick-fil-A. So I love the chicken minis at Chick-fil-A, and the thing I like about them is the honey butter that's brushed over the little chicken minis. And I thought a couple years ago, hey, I'm going to start doing that with my Bierocks. So right before they come out of the oven, I do this little secret, and I brush them with honey butter. And I haven't seen my Mennonite lady friends in over 20 years, because that's been how long it's been since I've lived in Kansas. But I think that they would give me a nod about that. I think that they would be okay with that. So I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm going to melt it really quick in the microwave. Sometimes I sing the Jeopardy song because I don't do it the whole time. Do, 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 do. Okay, I think the butter's done. I'm gonna, whoops, it's not done. It was a harder Jeopardy question. Do, 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 do. Let's see if it's done. Yes, it's done. So I've got some melted 2 tablespoons of butter-ish. 2 tablespoons-ish. I get honey. I like local honey, only because it's supposed to be good for your allergies. And I just put maybe a tablespoon of honey in there. That might have been a little bit more than a tablespoon. And I take my little brusher and I swish it all together and make delicious honey butter. Now, I'm going to go over to the oven and look at my Bierocks, see what they're doing. I actually might take it out and put it on top of the stove to brush the honey. Aren't those beautiful? They kind of look like hamburger buns, don't they? But when we cut into them, there's going to be more than just plain old hamburger buns. So I take the honey butter, I take my little brush. I like this kind of rubbery brush, silicone, just because it's so much easier to clean than those hair brushes that my mom used to do. Like, I'm not talking about hair brushes, but you know, the brushes that had like horse hair or maybe even synthetic hair on it. And I just brush over the top with this honey butter. It'll help brown it up just a little bit more. These are almost done, so you do this about the last 5 or 10 minutes of the bake. You don't have to put it all on. You don't have to put everything that's in there. Just make sure that you've coated them really nicely. And then put it back in the oven for about 5 more minutes. And your family will be so happy. And you don't have to tell them you put honey butter in there. And you don't even have to tell them that you stole it from Chick-fil-A's Chicken Minis. This is just whatever you want. Now, some people might want to put butter on it and put some little ranch dressing mix on it, or you can put any kind of spice on top of it you want. There's no wrong way to do this, except if you just don't do it. That might be a wrong way. Okay, I'm going to see if they're done. They should be done, but I always like to do the test on the bottom first. There is more dough on the bottom, so I just want to make sure they're brown. So I always take my little spatula and I turn it up. Ooh, yeah, perfectly nice and brown. These babies are done. And they're ready to love somebody with. So we put them here and we let them cool. And I don't know if you can see how beautifully buttery and shiny they are. They look like little pockets of love. And I'll tell you a funny story. A couple weeks ago, I actually made these for the family, and there's only 3 of us that live in the house now, and these make 16. So I took about 8 of them, put them in a basket, and I sent it across the street to my neighbors, and the little girl over there that's 9 came across, and she said, "On Christmas morning, I want these, Miss Diane." So once again, she felt the love. Now, Michelle, here comes the love. This is the part that we're all waiting for. And I hope you love it as much as I do. I think this is comfort food. So let's just take one of these. It's been cooling. I'm going to cut it in half so we can see what it looks like inside. Just beautiful homemade bread with some meat inside. And I'll do another one here. Because I put the honey butter on, it's kind of sticky and gooey.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So, why don't you try that? That one looks like it's got more meat, so I want you to love the meat.
A little extra love there.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I love it.
And I can totally see what you mean, like, the kids would never know.
I know, they wouldn't. They're probably going to be like, "Hey, what's that stuff in there?" And you're like, "It's love. It's love."
That's awesome.
You can take these on a family picnic. You can have them for movie night. You can do whatever you want with them. They're delicious. You can even have them for breakfast.
Wow, super yummy.
What do you think?
They're great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing your love. I mean, it is really a beautiful thing. And it's a wonderful thing that we can share food with one another and then also express that kindness and that caring and that joy of being together.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's yummy.
But you can take those home.
I'll take them to the office is what I do.